hot on everybody's mind at the minute is probably the weather and the climate. In the last 6 months of this grazing season, it's been a prime example of how the weather can make a big difference to a grazing cycle. So the weather is always a challenge. However, with the input and the data from like the GrassCheck project, weather stations, everything that's available to us now on apps on our phones, with some pretty good decisions and early intervention, you can get through most weather scenarios to some degree without major disasters. So I think GrassCheck is a prime example of how it helps you get through the recent weather conditions and growing climates that we've seen over the few years, whether it's drought or excessive rain. Other challenges, yes, policy and what government are making us do, making us work by different timelines and different calendar dates is obviously making everything very difficult, and it's probably going to be even more difficult down the line with nitrogen regulations and carbon regulations coming in the future. But we went through all these before with nitrate directives and things, and I think if we're open-minded we can work through them. But on a grass-based system you have a wee bit more flexibility, I feel, for this going forward.
Well, weather, obviously today we're getting an odd shower and wind, but yeah, the weather's always a challenge. You're constantly, maybe, you know, if you're constantly adapting your grazing pattern, if it's wet and the sheep are trampling the ground and you're moving them out to higher covers if they're unsettled, which messes up your wedge and your grazing pattern, but you have to just keep constantly adapting with the weather.
The first, I suppose, the challenge is every farm has its own challenges. Ours would be a fairly elevated, although reasonably dry farm, but it's a colder, later start. Calving starts later. So we have the challenge of a later spring, a shorter growing season, and the risk of drought in the summer on shallow soils. We can cope with most grazing conditions with lots of access to fields, multiple gate accesses. So we have good lane network, and we use all those tools to graze efficiently.
So the main challenges we have here is the high rainfall. With over 1,500 millimetres a year, it's very hard to manage both grass, clover and multi-species.
And on that too, last year the wettest month of the year was July, when you expect to be the driest month of the year, so it makes things more challenging. At least if you got the rain in the winter time, you could handle it, but in July, when you expect to produce the most amount of grass and do the most amount of field work, to have the wettest month of the year is very challenging.
Going forward, I think, especially in the carbon side of things, I think we just need to reinsure that in Northern Ireland, especially on our grassland-based systems, we are at the top of our game on a global scale. Whereas grassland production goes, I think research and innovation just needs to highlight how well we are doing at the minute, and this should be pushed towards our governments and policies, especially on the carbon side and the ammonia directives, that we are up there and we don't actually need to be dictated to on how to do it properly. I think we actually need to be learned from in so many cases. Other things on the innovative side, I would actually love someone to come up with a magic wand and get a multi-species forward clover safe sprays to make life much easier, and we can diversify our swords without being limited by weed control. If somebody even brought a drone out that could spot spray, that would be a perfect example of how we can use technology on our grassland.
Well, I mentioned weed control. I think that's constantly an issue with clover. We know from anecdotally there's definitely various stories of killing off clover and killing weeds for 1 year and them coming back the next. In terms of other research, there's possibly a lot of potential, I think, with in particular dairy farmers that are zero grazing or pre-mowing. Generally, I know a lot of them probably don't use that much clover, but there's big potential there, and it's a win-win both financially and environmentally.
Well, we're looking at what we've noticed in the new varieties. The They do not take a lot of abuse, especially in the shoulders of the season, and you have to be careful with that. With the clover, weed control is definitely an issue, and the use of herbicides for that. And then I suppose you're always looking, if you're using more clover, you have to be considering how you're going to handle that with cows, and the bloat risks and management of that is different again. So those are the sort of things where I suppose we're looking and we access knowledge to make sure those aren't problems for us.
Grassland research needs to concentrate on grass varieties and clover varieties and multi-species varieties to make them more hardy and more persistent in challenging conditions, especially in the West. A lot of work has been done to make them more drought resistant, but I think more work needs to be done to make them more resistant to waterlogging and tramping and damage by livestock.
More things going forward. I would probably like to see longer trials going through on farm. A 2 to 3 year, I don't think it's really only getting established and up and running. I would like to see more 5 to 10 year trials on farm coming through to really justify and see how that system works for a period of time, rather than just taking data from the first 1 or 2 years and making that the proven information that's been gathered, when it's not really, because there's been such variations within the past couple of years. The weather has been a massive thing for us in the past 5 years. These are not normal weather patterns. So to take 2 dry years or every year as the same, every year has not been the same, and it's not a fair comparison, in my opinion, for these things going forward, to just earmark a system and say that's the way it is, or that's the way it should be, or this is the data we found. It's not a fair comparison. So more research I would like to see going forward on that, on a broader spectrum across Northern Ireland and the UK. I would also like to see more of a localisation or county by county, nearly farm by farm type system, grass-based system, intensive beef finishing system, same in the dairy sector, whatever, to try and, for the carbon coming forward, to try and count more what is being gained or what's not being gained, or disadvantages coming through on these systems. How much is when my cattle are sitting out here 365 days of the year and they're eating grass, and the whole cycle is going back through, and the methane cycle isn't, yes, it's a cycle, but it's not that long a cycle coming through, and how is that affecting really the big global picture coming forward, and more of these localisation trials, rather than just branding us as UK-wide or Ireland-wide or that sort of way. It needs to be more in localised areas to really compare and see what's coming forward, because climates are so, even within our own county, climates from here to 5 miles over the road. We're in an area here, we're in a very low rainfall area, but 5 miles over the road they would get 5 inches more rain a year than we would here, that type of thing. So it's a big thing that way.